Hello, it's Krine here, with the build that optimizes the Deflecting Hardtear, aka the Sekiro tier. But first, for those of you who haven't watched my Crystal tier list, let's get a quick refresher from my Crystal tier video on how exactly the Deflecting Hardtear works. This Sekiro tier lasts for 5 minutes, ensuring that you basically won't run out of time, even if you play defensively. To explain precisely, it would be easier to split the effect into two parts. First, guarding within 6 frames of 30 FPS, which means 0.2 seconds of an attack hitting you, will grant you 100% physical negation, 75% elemental negation, 75% status negation, and reduces incoming stamina damage taken by 65%. This is a huge buff to guarding, so you don't even need to be guarding with a shield. Secondly, if an attack is deflected within those 6 frames, multi-hit attacks still count as one single deflection, even though all hits will receive the increased damage negation and reduced stamina cost from part 1 of the effect. If an attack is deflected, you will receive a guard counter buff that lasts for 5 seconds and can continuously be refreshed. Subsequent deflects increase the guard counter buff up to tier 4. Furthermore, attacks from enemies seem to be labeled as either a regular attack or a strong attack, which can increase your buff by more than a tier in one deflect. For example, the Omen in the sewers has plenty of strong attacks that will increase your guard counter buff by 2 tiers at a time. Blocking just 2 strong attacks in a row will immediately shoot you to a tier 4 buff. Strong or weak attacks do not seem to be determined by the stamina damage you take, as you can see from the knight outside the Dragon Communion Church, where his strong attack deals less stamina damage than his weak attack. I've also tested the tier using vastly different guard boosts. As for what the effect of each tier is, here you go. You will get an increase in damage, stamina damage, and poise damage done, depending on the tier of your guard counter buff. Missing a deflection or executing a guard counter does not reset the tier of your guard counter buff. The only thing that does is letting 5 seconds pass without another deflection. Since stronger enemies like bosses tend to have plenty of strong attacks or attacks multiple times in a row, it is not difficult to quickly reach tier 4 buff or maintain it. And as you can see, a tier 4 buff offers an incredible damage and poise damage multiplier. Okay, so how can we best make use of this crystal tier? Since this tier grants us 100% physical negation on deflecting, alongside other buffs to blocking, we can basically skip using a shield and run our weapon two-handed instead to make full use of higher damage and poise damage, as long as we deflect well, of course. Additionally, we also have access to the two-handed sword talisman, which is a great way to increase our damage. And finally, two-handing weapons also provides the heavier weapon types with hyper armor, which makes landing guard counters much easier. In essence, this is going to be a very simple build, since it is 100% melee focused and deflecting hardtear based. The only thing we have to solve is to look at the different potential weapon choices. Thinking of guard countering, one particular weapon must come into mind. The new black steel Greathammer has a unique guard counter. With base faith scaling, this warhammer has an exceptionally great sacred and flame infusion, which is what we want. The flame infusion has higher AR, but it will need to pass through defense thrice. The only reason the flame infusion still performs well is because it has a much higher faith scaling than its sacred counterpart, so its flame infusion's AR is high enough to compensate for 3 damage types, depending on the defense of the target, of course. For now though, I'm going to keep it on sacred infusion to make calculations easier, and when I do tests on the Omen, I'll make sure the other weapons are on sacred too, because the Omen has higher sacred negation than fire. While you can use the black steel Greathammer for this build, it isn't actually my final choice. A big reason is that, despite the special guard counter, The weapon portion of this hammer's guard counter is actually weaker than other weapons since it summons the additional AoE on the ground. If we include this AoE, the guard counter will be doing more damage than alternatives normally. However, the bonus of Deflect Tier and Curved Sword Talisman does not apply to this AoE, since it is not really part of the guard counter, but an additional circle that's summoned, kind of like a spell. Therefore, the bonus damage from Deflect Hardtear doesn't benefit this Greathammer as much as other weapons. Another option that some might be curious about is Backhand Blades, because of their relatively hard-hitting guard counter. Backhand Blades hit up to 4 times on their two-handed guard counter. However, they are bugged and do not get any bonus damage from both the Deflecting Hardtear and the Curved Sword Talisman at the moment. Even if they are not bugged, I wouldn't choose Backhand Blades though. Their base attack is lower than heavier weapons, and they don't have as much poise damage. It also has a very bad motion value for critical hits, meaning that we might as well just be attacking with our light attack chain or heavy attack. And it also won't use our weapon art of choice well. When it comes to dealing damage to bosses during their staggered phase, which is an integral part of our rotation, the Backhand Blade will fall short. Finally, Backhand Blades also have really poor guard boost. The Deflecting Hardtear helps a lot here, yes, but it's still just too low. Missing a deflect means your entire stamina bar is going to disappear. And even if you time your deflects well, against bosses that keep attacking, your stamina is going to disappear in no time. This leads us to my main weapon selection for this build, the Executioner's Greataxe, one of the best Greataxes in the game, and the best weapon for critical hits when you can afford it. Thanks to its bonus critical hit multiplier, this weapon easily beats other weapons of similar weight class, and its high base attack means that it deals more damage than Misericord. While it does lose out a bit of attack and poise damage when compared to the Black Steel Greathammer, it isn't any weaker on the guard counter damage when including Deflecting Hardtear and Curved Sword Talisman. Furthermore, if we activate our weapon art of choice, Royal Knight's Resolve, which grants us 80% bonus damage to our next hit, the Executioner's Greataxe will actually outdo the Black Steel Greathammer, since Royal Knight's Resolve won't be buffing the special AoE either. Royal Knight's Resolve also helps us do even more damage on critical hits. However, there is a 0.75 times modifier on Royal Knight's Resolve for critical hits, so it will only increase your damage by 35%. The good news is, it works on both hits of the critical damage, so it is just a straight 35% buff. But yes, this Ash of War is a big reason why we need an infusible weapon, as it provides a huge 80% damage bonus on our guard counters. Even with just some simple buffs, without doing all the self-poisoning and maddening routine, I'm one-shotting the Omens with ease. And that's a crazy amount of damage, because if the Omen didn't die, I can simply Royal Knight's Resolve and deflect again, while maintaining the Deflecting Hardtear's 1.8 times damage buff. And when they're staggered, go for a critical hit, which I can't even show you the full damage of while buffed, because the Omen dies on the first smaller hit. So here's the calculation for the actual damage. Finally, there's one last reason why the Greataxe is a perfect fit for the build. When you're not fighting bosses, or even when you are, sometimes you might want to be proactive instead of waiting for a guard counter. Compared to similar or heavier weapon types, the Greataxes have a fast charged heavy attack, which I believe is more valuable than higher poise damage for this build. This helps you deal with many faster enemies well, because not everything is easily deflectable, and the charged heavy is your backup plan. As for the armor, these are what I'm using. The only piece that gives a bonus is the Fire Knight's Helm, which gives 2% HP, 5% stamina, and 4.5% more equip load. As this is a melee-oriented build that needs quite a bit of stat points, it's a good fit. But if you don't like how it looks, you can definitely change up the fashion, as long as you meet 51 poise for PvE. Let's take a look at my stat distribution. Hero is my optimal class choice. 23 endurance is enough for my build, but higher stamina makes the build even smoother. It's why I'm running the Fire Knight's helm. 34 strength and 80 faith for our weapon and infusion of choice. If you do go for the Black Steel Greathammer, remember to redistribute some strength into dexterity to meet the requirements. 9 points in mind to have exactly 95 FP. This allows you to cast Golden Vow, and Flame grants me strength. I'm usually not a big fan of Flame grants me strength due to its duration, but for this build, it's good since you can get something to do if the boss hops away. It does mean that I usually go with the Flame Infusion over the Sacred Infusion as well. Greater barriers are still great, so if you want to use them, invest 1 more point into Mind. For the Sacred Seal of Choice, just use any 0-weight seals if you don't care about damage incantations. But since you have 80 faith, if you want to work in damage incantations, use the Erdtree seal. And the rest of the stats goes to Vigor, of course. Here is a level 200 example where you get more bulk, damage, and resources. Now, I bet some of you wonder why I went for faith investment instead of strength investment for fire infusion when I'm not even using other incantations. I can easily go high strength with just enough faith to cast the incantation buffs. One reason is because you can swap between Flame and Sacred, depending on the weakness of your boss. It also scales better if you're going past 150. The other reason is while your overall attack will be similar, the Faith Infusion has a larger portion of elemental damage. This has to do with our crystal tier of choice. The Deflecting Hardtear is obvious, and the second best way to buff our damage is either of the Shrouding Crack tiers. I don't use the Green Burst Crystal tier, but if you find that you're not very good on the deflect timing, this can quickly help you recover your lost stamina when you miss deflects. As for my Talismans, this is the first PvE build that I've made without the S-tiered Dragon Crest Great Shield Talisman. This is because if you're deflecting properly, the vast majority of damage you're likely going to be taking is from elemental damage. This is why this build runs the Crimson Seed Talisman +1 as our main defensive talisman. Running the specific elemental negation talismans also works, but I'm not a big fan of the Pearl Drake version because it is a lot weaker than the Dragon Crest Great Shield. The rest of our talismans are there to increase our damage. There is a talisman that I want to mention why I'm not running for bosses but can be swapped in for exploration. The Blade of Mercy increases your damage by 20% for 20 seconds after a critical hit. It does not buff the damage of the critical strike itself. If you're using your Royal Knight's Resolve with your deflects and crits, you don't really need that many hits to finish off a boss. They're usually more than half dead after your first critical strike, so the effect of Blade of Mercy isn't as great, especially because you usually need to restack your deflects, and you're not guaranteed to make great use of the 20 seconds after the first critical strike. One last trick is to bring some throwable consumables. If you don't hit the boss for a while, their stance health will start to regenerate. There are plenty of cheap and fast throwables like darts and daggers to prevent the stance decay. You can also use some of those materials you're just collecting dust with to craft some. Like and subscribe for more optimized builds like this one. If you want to support my work, please consider buying my fantasy novel or donating to my Patreon down below. With a book purchase, you can also request a topic from me. Krite, signing out.